There are some concerns about the security implications, as we've just been discussing with Dr. Swart, of our country's stance on the conflict. Newzroom Afrika's politics reporter Ziyanda Ngcobo is in studio to talk more about it. Look, Ziyanda, welcome. Our elections are before the US elections taking place later on this year, I believe in November. But one does wonder, does President Cyril Ramaphosa and his comments after the NEC meeting at the end of January, how do we determine how much water that holds about the threat that could come on South Africa, given its stance on Israel?
I think it holds a lot of water, but at the same time, no one is really willing to come forward and actually say it as it is. And of course, by its very nature, intelligence is meant to be covert, so we can actually have an appreciation for that. But I mean, for an example, we forget sometimes that actually a state intelligence falls under the minister in the presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, and I actually asked her, at the steps of the City Hall last week after the State of the Nation address about whether or not we should be, concerned about this, given the fact that sources tell me that, over and above the minister actually sharing that she's had to have her security beefed up, and Minister Naledi Pandor placing that at the feet of Israel, that even some of those who are on the legal team also received strange messages, so to put it that way, regarding their family members. And so now that we are continuing, as we have committed to do, in terms of addressing what we believe is genocide being committed by Israel, now that recent request for an urgent intervention, there are questions, especially after the president has said that it would come in the form of a covert election intervention. What does that mean? Is it just the president, politicking here and trying to, preempt what may not be a favorable election outcome for the ANC? Or is this a genuine concern, given the history that we've seen, the reports into the July unrest being very, pointed about the National Security Council not meeting often enough? And our intelligence being found to fail at certain points. This is a geopolitical matter that South Africa has now found itself right in the center of. And other Arab nations, by the way, some have remained quiet. So what does South Africa have, or does it have the type of intelligence to be able to deal with the possible backlash of what we are doing?
Yeah, and of course, there are questions around whether we don't have our own challenges here at home as well. It doesn't help, I suppose, Ziyanda, the fact that all of this is happening in what is meant to be a watershed here for our own country as well. And as you say, is the president just politicking? Is he preempting a bad outcome for the ANC come the 2024 South Africa decides election? Or are his concerns real? I mean, how do we determine that? Or do we just say both things can be true at the same time?
Both things actually can be true at the same time, and I'm still working my phone in terms of getting intelligence experts, because on the one hand we know that Israel, Mossad has been hailed as one of the greatest intelligence bodies that exist, but many say, well, we actually don't know what it does, and also, if they were so good, how did they allow it to October 7th to actually happen? But at the same time, then you look at us in Africa, but South Africa in particular, because we're at the center of taking this matter to the international, courts of justice. As I've mentioned, our own domestic intelligence has been found wanting, I should say, in recent times. And is this, besides the economic diplomacy aspect, which has been spoken about, the fallout of our products being boycotted and the trade relations between South Africa and Israel, but the security aspect, and these talks in political circles, I must say, Michelle, about regime change, and this is important if you put it in the context of what Dr. Mia Swart was speaking about, that she foresees that will only be seen once the U.S. elections take place, and you go back to the claims that were made by the U.S. ambassador to South Africa, Ruben Brigitte, about South Africa loading arms onto Lady R bound for Russia for that war between Russia and Ukraine. And so the relationship between Israel and the U.S. is not a secret, and they're one of the Western allies that has remained in the corner of Israel alongside the likes of Germany, for an example. So what does that mean then when there's already been, well, at least within ANC circles, that attempt by Brigitte was part of a much larger machination of possible regime change, and then you bring that closer to this conflict, and South Africa taking this match to the International Court of Justice, and then the mis or disinformation, as claimed by the South African government, that the money for this, these court proceedings, the lawyers were paid by Iran. And so the point is, South Africa is in the center of a much larger, of a big, geopolitical matter here, and those questions still remain.
Yeah, absolutely. And if what we want and if what will make the difference, for example, is for the likes of the US and Germany to denounce what Israel is doing, just the latest bombardment of what is meant to be a safe zone of Rafah, it seems that we're going to be holding our breath, because it doesn't seem likely.
Doesn't seem likely, and I think the reason why South Africa is also asking for that urgent intervention is also that they have a record that they've tried through other channels, through the UN channels in particular, to try and stop what's happening. Remember, at the end of February, it would have been the month that Israel has to give back that report.
That would have been the 1 month.
That 1 month, which was part of the judgment that was handed down at the end of January, to say, what have you done to prevent the killing of people, to ensure that there's humanitarian assistance that reaches civilians, prevention of loss of life, and all those that are outlined in the specific article in the Genocide Convention. And so this is also, I think, part of the record keeping, because by the time South Africa, if you remember, made its representations at the ICJ, it had also a list of things that it had tried to do in terms of intervening, whether through the UN, speaking directly to Israel about its conduct, and that many have said has actually bolstered and made South Africa's case compelling. So I think that is also part of why South Africa is doing that, so that when there's a dispute, which is highly likely when that report comes out in terms of the detail and what has been done and what has not been done, that all these things have been fully on record.
And I imagine, Ziyanda, it's going to also raise a whole range of questions about the powers of the ICJ.
Yes, and their limitations. So there has been a lot of talk, and I think that was also aptly addressed by the ICJ in terms of jurisdiction. So the issue of jurisdiction of the ICJ was addressed, the jurisdiction even of South Africa and the standing of South Africa bringing the case before the ICJ, that matter was addressed. And so on that score, that shouldn't be an issue. However, it may be a matter of how things are enforced, which is why that report is so critical, and that's why South Africa deemed that judgment as a success. As you mentioned earlier before speaking to Dr. Swart, that it just was one step short of, calling for a ceasefire. Yeah, absolutely. Newzroom Afrika's Ziyanda Ngcobo, thanks very much indeed for coming into studio, and we look forward to your reporting on the matter. Certainly plenty of issues feeding into this story.